In exactly 10 days, Nigerians will head to the polls to elect a new president. But that's only the beginning of the elections season, which ends on March 11, all other things being equal. Ahead of the elections, a mix of events like the mayhem caused by fuel and cash scarcity, as well as violent attacks on party supporters at campaign rallies, have raised questions about the safety and security of voters before, during, and after the elections. As Human Rights Watch puts it, there is a thick veil of violence shrouding the 2023 elections that undermines people's fundamental rights to vote. When Nigeria's security bosses met with the elections management body, they assured the Independent National Electoral Commission that personnel had a lid on safety and security issues. They also assured the general public that the elections 2023 will be safe and secure. But the violent memories of the 2019 elections still linger, and that's why we're having this discussion today. You're welcome to The Square. I am Keminni Amanor. Joining our gathering today are Professor Mahmud Abdul. He's a political and security analyst. He's joining us from London. We also have Dr. Tony Ofoyetan. He's Director General of the International Institute of Professional Security here in Nigeria. Gentlemen, you're welcome to The Square. I'll start off with you, Prof. When you look at the cocktail of events that have taken place the last few weeks in Nigeria, I'm talking about the fuel and cash scarcity, and I'm also talking about the attacks on supporters of various political parties. How do you think that these developments will change or affect election security dynamics this year?
First, let's look at it this way, and thank you for having me on. Good afternoon, Nigerians, wherever you are, and viewers across the world. Security is rightly spoken for in different ways and in different elections in our country. The way we conceive of the 2023 elections is different from the way the 2019 or the 2015 elections, were conceived. More particularly because we are talking of two historical eras, within a generational span. While the managers of the nation state speak to security as one security contraption or arrangement or mechanism or framework, for securing public order, politicians for whose sakes elections are conducted see security as one contraption arrangement as well, that seeks to promote their electoral gains or electoral losses, as the case may be. But in the context of 2023, for example, we are dealing with the currency crisis or the cash or the currency swap crisis that we have back home in Nigeria. We are dealing with lack of fuel or petroleum products across the length and breadth of our country. And if both are seen as security subjects, of course, they will naturally challenge the whole business of organization of elections in our country. Because why do I say this? Issues that are political for individuals can also be transformed into security or national security issue. How the state addresses the question of oil supplies or petroleum supplies, for example, interrogates the whole question of security of the nation state. Where you conduct elections in a region where you have glut of petroleum product and you don't have same in another region, what invariably follows is that in those regions where you cannot provide petrol, for example, or fuel, people will naturally take to the streets in protest. And when they are protesting, what you're doing is hollow out the bottom of the security arrangement that you create, you create for elections. So that is the foreground or background that we are dealing with in respect of security, in respect of providing security for the elections in 2023. But like I said, we have two sets of individuals that speaks to the business of election differently. While the managers of our nation state see elections as arrangement for securing public order and peace. Politicians, for whose sakes, these elections are conducted, see security as arrangement that can secure the whole business of the electoral gains and losses.
Indeed. I move on to you, Doc, now. Based on your experience, what other threats would you say that the elections this year will be facing within the period now, during the elections and after?
Thank you very much for having me. And of course, I align myself with the position of Prof, except for the fact that I would just want to add that, one of the major challenges we have in this particular election is that it is divided along ethnic and religious divide. We don't have to be pretentious about it. And that also becomes a major security challenge, as it were. We have a situation where predominantly the Obidatis are the Igbos, the Emilokons are the Yorubas, the articulated are the Hausas, with a pocket of interwoven other members from other regions and the like. And that becomes a major challenge. You would also have seen that play out severally in there are different campaigns in different regions. The good example was the Obidati campaign that happened a few weeks ago, where some of their supporters were attacked. And you also have the same thing in other regions too. So we expect that if government did not do the needful now, as it were, we may not be too surprised to have it during a proper election, during election days, where you have people who have to monitor whether you are of a particular tribe and who most probably you will vote for, and as a result of that, try to disrupt election in that region. We saw it play out in places like Festac in 2019. We saw it play out in places like Ojota in Lagos State in 2019, where some people were denied vote or were prevented from voting, all on the ground of ethnic divide and all those stuff like that. So the same thing also up north there, where you also see, you may also see pockets of frustration and prevention of vote in some areas, most probably as a result of religious divide. So these are areas that security agencies should really look at. Yes, good enough that CBN is talking about a cashless policy that would presumably try to prevent the sharing of money, which some of us will tell you emphatically that we don't believe that this is something that will scale through. Because if you look at immediately CBN, Central Bank talked about the currency redesign and rolled out the first chunk of currency that were rolled out and sent to all the banks, suddenly disappeared from the banks. And they didn't have any money again. So the question is how
that brings me to the question, Doc, about what strategies, I mean, given the somewhat uniqueness of the security challenges of the 2023 elections, what strategies would you expect the security agencies to apply this time that will perhaps be different from what they have done in previous times?
Well, I think number one is for them, they themselves not to be part of the apprehension. What I mean by being part of the apprehension is that once there is no assurance of violence, the assumption of violence should not be resisted with another violence. So I think that that is one thing, because most of the violence that erupted, many a times it is even the security agents themselves that will either shoot into the air, and before you know what is happening, the other groups will start resisting, and that becomes a pocket, some level of violence. For my own understanding of what is happening now, I expect that they should, as much as possible, prevent pulling agents and the like from having too much of interaction with the people themselves. Because I know very well that what they will do in most cases is to ask you to go inside the polling booth, snap
whichever party you have voted for, snap that, and when you come out, show them who you voted for, and they will give you money. Definitely, because you are sure that the politician, they have their own way of assessing fund. It's not because CBN has not printed enough fund.
Right.
It's just because those funds have gone into the hands of those that ought to go into before it gets to the hand of the public. So that on its own is going to be a defeat. But for security-wise, I also think that the security agencies should look at the possibility of waking up before what you call the miscreants, because what I expect is that in some areas and locality, I expect that they will wake up earlier than expected, shoot sporadically into the air to create fear in the heart of electorates that will want to come out and vote, to prevent them from voting. Now that will come out in areas where politicians know they are going to have very weak votes, or they most likely will lose. So what they will do is to try to cause mayhem, fear, intimidate people to prevent them from coming out. So the agency should be proactive in those areas.
Indeed. And speaking of proactiveness, Prof, I ask you the same questions, but while you answer that, tell us, how confident are you, given the events that have happened the last few weeks, the assurances we've heard from security agencies? How confident are you in them that, they really do have a lid on the security issues that may arise from now until the election season is over?
Second questions are interwoven. My response would be this. There's one lack of recognition of the fact that we're proposing to conduct elections in very volatile and securitized environment. I will explain. Two, there is a negligent refusal by those who manage the nation state, to frame the whole business of security of elections in our country. While it is seen as a public order issue, it is not considered as a national security issue. Political issues that are basically not of threat to the state are seen for what they are, just security issue. But they forget that security in elections do not exist or do not happen naturally. Like my colleague has just expressed, these security issues or threats, erupt as a result of the constructs, politicians put around the question of electoral gains and electoral choices and losses that they tend to suffer at elections. For me, going back to the first part of my answer, have the managers of our national state securitized elections enough for them to understand that we are operating today in very volatile and securitized environment, whether in the southeast where you have the challenges of IPOB and ESN, or in the southwest where you have the growing resurgence of activists of the Yoruba nation. If you go to the northwest and the northeast particularly where Boko Haram has been operating for more than 20 years, and the northwest where bandits have seized swathes, of vast lands, across the length and breadth of our country. If you take states like Kebbi, Zamfara, Sokoto, Katsina, for example, where over 84 persons were killed, I think last week or 2 weeks ago in Bakori, and if we go back again to states like Zamfara and Kebbi, where over 12 local governments are currently in the hands of bandits, where you don't have any semblance of governance, you begin to ask what sort of security are we rolling out to ensure that elections hold in these places, not only holding but securing the lives of people who will be coming out to vote, and the property not only of the state but of individuals who will put themselves at the front line of the elections, at the front lines of the elections. But what I think that the state should do is begin to look at those areas that will pose threat to the state. Who are these non-state actors that are possibly or probably, considered as threat to the nation state or to national elections? In doing this, you begin to profile, you begin to draw maps across our country, looking at personages, looking at forces, looking at institutions, looking at what John Austin described as speech acts, for example. You know, as I do, that just last week, a leading Nigerian politicians made a ridiculous, ludicrous claim of a presidential candidate planning to organize coup if his ambition fails at the election. I'm referring to Chief Fani Kayode here. I'm aware that he has walked away from some of the incendiary remarks that he made last week, because the Department of State Security had already put into the sword. These are some of the speech acts that interrogate national security at elections, and these are some of the threats that I think the state must begin to look more.
And I'll have us look more.
At one point, I also want to stress
quickly:
the site of contestation does not only exist at the precinct of the polling unit; it also exists at frameworks, platform, and social media, where you find people expressing speech acts, that basically threaten the nation state.
Indeed. And I want us to look at voter behavior a little later on in our discussion. But right now, I want to jump on the back of something you said. You talked about these restive areas and, how security agencies could operate there to make sure that, things happen rightly and correctly in those areas. And I want to ask you, is there the wherewithal, the capacity, and even the strength to be able to go to these areas, make sure people are not disenfranchised, and the vote is actually held over there? Prof, what do you think?
I seriously empathize with the nation state. We are at our weakest point at the moment. And if you look at the lead security agency that is expected by law to protect, the integrity of ballot and to secure elections, the Nigerian police, they are drawn a drag team across the length and breadth of our country. And if you look at the army, that is also, that is also helping the police in securing the civil space. You find them in combat regions in the southeast where they are battling the ESN and IPOB, and they are also involved in, in checking the excesses of Boko Haram and bandits, both in the northeast and the northwest. And if we look at what is emerging from the southwest, particularly from the Yoruba nation, you begin to have sympathy for the nation state. But non-state actors cannot be more powerful than the state itself. If the state recognizes that speech acts, actions of non-state institutions, personages and forces and institutions are capable of undermining the integrity and the integrity of the ballot, it becomes a responsibility of the state to put its act together. General Rabo, I watched him on TV yesterday, has assured Nigerians that the army is capable of securing the territorial integrity of our country. And the Nigerian police force, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, that the president of the country... And
Prof, I don't mean to cut you, but the reason I'm asking about wherewithal, you mentioned the army. It is the same army that is accused of violence and indiscriminate killings in the 2019 elections. 4 years on, there hasn't been closure on that, even though a committee was set up to look into the matter. It had 2 weeks to perform. Nothing has happened. How seriously can we take this assurance that General Irabor is giving us now?
Well, we just have to take him for his words. Anything I say here is speculative. What he said they are rolling out is what they are rolling out. But from experience, we know what the Nigerian army is capable of doing if they are allowed to express the military power that is consistent with what we know of that institution. But what I worry is the way we use politics to politicize, the security process itself. And I'll cite an example. The IG has currently, I think last week, announced that a task team on planning around security for the elections will be set up by him, and he did set up a task team headed by somebody. I think AIG Gaba Uma. who the media alleged, actively took part in the rigging of elections in Imo State in 2019. And as a deputy commissioner of police, his name was mentioned in some of the atrocious activities that took place in 2019. So when you see personages of state like the Inspector General of Police, not putting integrity at the heart of, some of the schemes he's rolling out, you begin to ask yourself, are policemen battle ready to combat those who will be willing, who are set to undermine the integrity of the 2023 elections? I have some doubts.
I see. Unfortunately, we've lost Dr. Ofoyetan. We'll rework the lines and bring him back onto the discussion. But, Prof, while we're at it, I want us to take a listen to some Nigerians we spoke to on the streets earlier today on their thoughts about security and the votes come February 25.
Coming elections, I don't have anything to fear about. You just go out there, cast your vote, and go home. But if you sense there's trouble in your area, better stay away. Understand? So with what's going on in the nation now, I will advise everyone to make sure he or she casts his or her vote. It's important with what is going on already.
My first security issue, especially in some states like Lagos, Kano, where we do have much vote. And I pray everything come out good.
Well, I'm going to vote, definitely, because we have to change things in this country. Things just have to change for the better. So the old people who have been ruling us for the past many years ago, since independence, we just have to have a change. So we have a new, so I will be able to have a vibrant policy. Nigeria is a very peaceful country. With all these problems that have been going on, if it were other countries, they would have been riot and they would have been upheaval. But nothing of such has happened. I believe this election will be peaceful at the end of the day.
Hoping and praying that we are going to have peace-free election, election that is free of crime and fight. So we pray that the security agency will be on top of that game. And the INEC also will do the right thing. So, by God's grace, we expect.
Many thanks for staying with us here. You heard some people from the streets of Lagos on what they think about security and going to the polls come February 25, 2023. Still with me here, Dr. Tony Ofoyetan. He's Director General of the International Institute of Professional Security. We also have Professor Mahmud Abdul. He's a political and security analyst. Gentlemen, thank you for your patience. And Dr. Ofoyetan, thank you for coming back here on our connection. And before we move on onto the issue of voter attitude, I want us to talk about some of the things that I was engaging Prof on. I know you have a few things to say about whether or not the security personnel or agencies have the wherewithal to be able to go into some of these restive areas, and whether or not we can be rest assured, as General Rabo is telling us, to trust the military again.
That's what we expect the general to do. A very witty one for that matter, eloquent, and in fairness to him, they have done excellently well in many areas, except for the fact that having seen the antecedent of what has been happening in the north, in the southeast for some time, where you have IPOB declaring sit at home, and for now, it's been an order that has been religiously obeyed. And there was nothing the military could do. And for now, they've not been able to convince an average East that they are capable of countering any order that has been given by either the unknown gunmen or gun unknown men or the IPOB or whatever. So that also impedes on that assurance given by the distinguished Chief of Defense Staff. But having said so, it is not as if it's a tall order. I expect that they should use more of intelligence network, in the sense that as we speak now is the time for them to cage those they think are going to be major threats. It's not on that day. If you do it on that day, it's reactionary. If you do a few hours to that day, it's reactionary. What we expect is that now,
you know full well that there are some set of people that are going to be disrupting or causing commotion or trouble during the election. What do? You go after them now. You keep them on the run. You keep them busy. When you keep them busy and they're on the run, they will not be able to have the time to now come and disrupt the election or prevent people from going to exercise their franchise. So it's not just a matter of assurance. Nigerians, as we speak now, are not going to be assured because over the years, I'm talking of since 2019, they've not been able to convince average Eastern, and not to even talk of even in the Southeast too. Thank God that, Northeast. Thank God that relatively in the Northeast it's a little bit better now. That's also kudos to the military. But having said so, can they assuredly tell everybody there that please problem? So these are things that once they are able to identify those that are political thugs, those that are non-state actors, now identify the non-state actors that most probably could cause mayhem and cage them. The best way you think you can cage them, I'm not in position to explain that, but they know what to do to ensure that this set of people do not become a threat to the people at the end of the day. And of course, they should also look inward.
And I want us to go on a break, but before we do so, Doc, just quickly tell us. We know that ahead of the elections, while mapping out, the security agencies will map out their hotspots. But given the uniqueness of the 2023 elections, are there any new hotspots that you have determined, from your point of view, that the police should be paying attention to, or the security agencies should be paying attention to this year?
No. You see, if you ask me, I will tell you that Lagos State is going to be a hot spot, especially places like Festac, places like Ojota, places like Ojoalaba. They are going to be hot spots in this election. And of course, I expect that Imo State is going to be a hot spot. I expect that Rivers State is going to be a hot spot in this election. And just to mention this few, Benue State is not going to be left.
Well, I think that connection dropped again, and would use that opportunity and go on a break. When we come back, we'll talk about voters, supporters, and candidates' behavior now, during, and after the election. Stay with us.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
It is barely 10 days to the general elections in Nigeria, and we've been discussing security of the day and beyond here on the square today. Still with me are Professor Mahmud, Abdul, and Dr. Tony Ofoyetan. And gentlemen, I want us to look at voter behavior. The point is that a lot of the focus and a lot of times we put on our security agencies, what they must do and what they mustn't do. At this point, I want us to talk about voters as well. What are some of the behaviors that voters could engage in that could jeopardize safety and security, Prof?
Are you asking me first?
Yes, I'm asking you first, Prof.
First, I return to the point I made earlier about managers of the state, cognizing security as part of the arrangement of protection of the public order space. And I think for me, why we have security challenge is because of that disjuncture that exists between what the managers of the state consider security to be, security of elections to be, and what politicians ordinarily see security of elections to be as well. And more importantly, within the context of securing the election space, we also have to look at the role of the manager of the elections, the independent manager of the elections, INEC, and all that, where a body that ought to be neutral, now throws itself against neutrality and becomes a partisan body. It raises all sorts of problems across our country. If we had had the opportunity of looking at the election manipulation risk report issued by civil society organization, I think about 3 weeks ago, they raised the question about security flash points across 22 states of our country and low intensity of conflict in another 10 states, which probably means that in the 6 states of our country, there will be some sort of electoral battles, across 32 states, which of course invariably means as well that the lead security agency, Nigerian police, and also Nigerian Army or Defense Forces, security forces that will complement the Nigerian police in securing the ballot, have a lot of work to do in 2023. To answer your second question, yes, citizens have roles to play in securing the ballot, but what we have seen pre-election, is worrying. We've seen leading politicians like Adams Oshomole making incendiary remarks, basically inciting people to violence. We've seen traditional chiefs like the Bale of Etiosa in Lagos, caught on video, and caught on audio, basically inciting supporters against supporters of another political party. When people make security speech act that interrogates the national security of the state, it becomes a responsibility of either the state secret police or the police itself, to get these people arrested, And we have also seen, personages of the management body, INEC, making remarks that are incendiary, that are ethnic, that are dog whistling, that tend to raise doubt about the neutrality of the managers of the election itself. Some of the factors, some factors responsible for violence, whether pre-elections or post-elections, dovetail within the responsibility of those who should manage your elections.
Right.
But some of the remarks that we have seen the resident electoral commissioner in Lagos State, some of the remarks the REC of Lagos has made in recent times, do not show that the resident electoral commissioner understands his role as a neutral umpire. As a neutral umpire. But it becomes the responsibility of both individuals and of state to ensure that the rules of conduct which the Electoral Act provides, everybody must stay within the bounds. But that's not what we are saying. But unfortunately, the police, state security services that should ensure that people beat within the line, are not performing their roles here.
Indeed. Doc, I want us to look at the supporters, assigns of candidates or the political parties and the candidates themselves, and what role their speeches, the things they say, the things they do could improve or jeopardize safety and security now during the elections and post the elections. What role do you think that plays, and how could they behave better?
It's for every party connected to elections to recognize the fact that...
Prof, make your points though, but that question was meant for Dr. Ofoyetan. Go ahead and make the points quickly.
Yeah. It's for every party connected to elections to recognize the fact that the elections take place within the national space. And whatever speech acts that you do that destroys that national space eventually destroy the basis in which the nation state exists. After elections, the country ought to exist. And Nigerian politicians and supporters and even managers of the election should recognize that fact.
Indeed. Doc, on the same point, the behavior of and speeches made by people in the election, supporters of these people and their assigns. Doc, can you hear me? Oh, I think Doc's connection is frozen. Doc, are you back now?
Yes,
Dr. Ofoyetan, can you hear me?
Sorry, I think I'm in. Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Wonderful.
I don't know. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yes.
And I was asking you about what role, you know, the kind of things that the candidates, their supporters, and their signs say, and how it could affect the elections, the security and the sanctity of the elections. What do you think, and how can they change their behavior?
Well, I think the first thing is from the politicians themselves. The contestants themselves must understand that they have different set of supporters. They have supporters that will just listen to whatever they want to say. I believe in them and they go away without doing any further analysis. They also have supporters that are religious and they see them as gods. So they must be able to understand the fact that all their utterances are of very high importance. So they must not be seen as using words that will be inflammatory, words that will be inciting, words that will be provoking. And as much as possible, when you are they
not already doing a lot of that?
They are, but we just expect that they should be modest. The truth is that there are some of these things that cannot be removed from politics. In and outside Nigeria, we've seen different, in short, people is just, I don't know if that's part of politics, but even the supporters themselves must come to terms with something. The casualty is always on the supporters. And if the casualty is always on the supporter, they are expected to apply wisdom. Because at the end of the day, the politician is not going to be on the road either to shoot the gun, to handle the machete, or to become a victim of the machete. So it is now this one supporter of a politician against the other. At the end of the day, head or tail, you lose. And that is why they must come to terms with the fact that their life is as important as the life of their principal or their candidate. So let them tell themselves that after the election, life continues. Those that are dead, they are dead, and Nigeria moves forward. Nigeria will continue, whether you are alive or you are not alive. So if you die because of a politician, that's your headache. Nobody is going to sympathize with you other than your immediate family. The nation will just act as one of the collateral damages. So knowing full well that the nation is not going to stand as a standstill if you are gone as a result of electoral violence, then you should come to terms. You should be the person educating yourself. You should be the person talking to yourself. You should be the person, asking yourself salient questions at the end of the day. Right. During election, it's not a day for you to begin to banter words.
Indeed. We have a few minutes to go, and so I'd have to rush you through my last two questions. Prof, one of the most significant things that will determine whether, D-Day, which is February 25, will be successful, will be voter behavior. Now, on that day, what will be your advice to voters when they go out to vote? Professor?
For me,
yes.
Voters should recognize that any speech acts, any acts that are undertaken by them are a deviation from the democratic ideals. Their responsibility or civic duty on election days to go out and vote. But because we deal with an electoral environment that politicians deliberately compromise, that people who manage the electoral process, compromise from within. And we are talking about the integrity, transparency of the electoral process. People should stay peacefully within the precinct of the polling units. Observe where possible, ensure that their votes count.
Indeed. And Doc, you get the last minute on the program today. The other thing that will also be significant on that day will be dealing with disagreements or electoral disagreements. How prepared do you think we are as a nation to ensure that when people have disagreements on that day, it does not degenerate into full-blown chaos?
For us to understand is that there are legal mechanisms through which we can resolve disputes. So let's also make it a point of duty to avail ourselves of those legal mechanisms, which is the court. Let those all politicians, I'm sure they all have lawyers and they know what to do. But for the supporters themselves, they should leave the fight to the politicians themselves and not go on the street and begin to burn houses and begin to burn properties, either because your you assume that your candidate has been cheated and all those stuff like that. There are judicial means through which we can address our redresses. So I think that the Nigerians and politicians, everybody should avail themselves of the opportunity of going through the legal means. That is what will guarantee peace at the end of the day.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Professor Mahmud Abdul and Dr. Tony Ofoyetan. I appreciate your time with us today on The Square.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for the...
It's fine. We understand the technology. We'll talk again some other time. Indeed. We'll talk again some other time. It's election season. I'm very sure of that. And to you at home or wherever you're watching us from, thank you so much for your company today on the program. Remember, if you're in Nigeria and you're eligible to vote, vote and go home and wait on the results. My name is Keminni Amanor. I'll see you again, same time, here, tomorrow. Bye.